All right, so today's lesson we're going to talk about the first and the major part of the liturgy of the Word, which is where the readings are proclaimed in Holy Mass. But before we do that, let's do a little bit of vocabulary. So in the sanctuary, we have what's called the ambo. The ambo is a Greek word which means elevated place, and we use this word, which was taken from Eastern Christians, for the place where their priest would preach during the Mass. But we use that word for this pulpit, which is where we proclaim the readings and then the priest preaches. So that's the ambo. We also want to review some of the things that we talked about already in Lesson 10 about the books that are used in Holy Mass. So again, by way of a little bit of review, some of the vocabulary that we talked about in Lesson 10. The lectionary is the book which has the readings. It has all of the readings for the Mass in it and includes the responsorial psalm and what is sung before the Gospel. Now, we can also use what's called an evangelary, which contains just the evangelium, that is the Gospel. And this is usually in a nicer book with a nice gilt cover because the Gospel is directly about Jesus himself. And so we can have that and carry the evangelary in procession. The lectionary is printed in many ways. The lectionary, one of the lectionaries available in our country, for example, has things divided up for weekdays and also for ritual masses and also for Sundays. That's one way of dividing it up, and that's the particular set that we have here. There are other ways of doing it as well. But I did want to emphasize something about the liturgy of the Word and our books. It's very good to have your own book. We have this particular book at this parish, which is bilingual and has all of the readings for all of the Sundays and any of the feast days that we would celebrate on Sunday. Especially if you are a visual learner, this is a good thing to have because you'll remember and hear and recognize the words better and the text is better this way. So it's important, also helps us to read better, but it's very important to have something like this if it is helpful to you so that we don't forget what's being said at Mass, or even worse, ignore what's being said at Mass, but actually learn to follow along and really hear what God is saying through the Scriptures. Now, in your catechism for today's lesson, you're going to read about the Bible, and particularly you're going to read about the two parts of the Bible. So the whole Bible is divided in two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is about what came before Jesus, and the New Testament is what comes with Jesus, with his birth and following in the birth of the church. And this is going to be important to know because the readings come from different parts of the Bible. So on a normal Sunday, although it's a little bit different for weekday masses, on a normal Sunday, you're going to have three readings. Now remember, there's a lot of the Bible in the Mass. There's a lot of scripture that's quoted in our prayers and the way we do things. But for readings, there's three particular readings. So we have a reading or a first reading, and this usually comes from the Old Testament, from the time before Jesus. We have a psalm then that we sing in response to that, and then there's the second reading, or as it's known, the epistle, which means letter, and it comes from one of the New Testament epistles or letters, usually by St. Paul, but also Peter, James, John, and Jude as well. So they also had epistles in the New Testament, and we'll read from one of them. And then we also then have a reading from one of the Gospels, the four Gospels being Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, each of those saints. And so the first reading and the Gospel are usually somewhat connected. There's a theme that's between the two of them. But then the epistle, we simply just keep reading it in segments as we go from Sunday to Sunday. So those are the readings, and it's good for you to practice how to respond when the reader or the deacon or the priest begins and ends those readings as we are preparing, because it's important to listen during Mass as we listen to what God has to say to us.